Hey everyone, D&D Detective here. So last year, I got my hands on Nerdarchy's out-of-the-box encounters. I meant to do this video back when I got it, but life got in the way. Either way, I thought I'd do a review of the hardcover version of this product and share my thoughts. For the record though, I bought this with my own money, and this video isn't sponsored. Let's talk about the good things about this product. The book isn't just filled with serious encounters. There are some silly encounters thrown in here, though it tends towards more serious encounters. If you're willing to commit the time to read them, you might be able to find encounters you can use. I also like that several members of the D&D community have contributed encounters to the book. It's nice to see collaborations like this. The art in the book is actually really good. All the battle maps have color, and the book features some truly well done illustrations. The book also contains 16 new magic items that are used in these encounters. My favorite is probably the Eye of Fate, just because its curse seems like it provides a lot of DMing opportunities. These magic items nicely complement the encounters here, though I'm not familiar enough with all the magic items in 5e to say whether or not they are appropriate for their rarity. The binding of the book seemed fine to me. The pages didn't come out when I pulled on them, and my book arrived with no damage to it. The paper also seemed like good quality paper. In fact, I can confirm that it will survive pop being spilled on it with no problems. Now let's talk about the bad things. The layout and presentation in this book is disappointing for a $25 PDF and is unprofessional for a hardcover D&D encounter book. As a late backer, I paid $40 for this, and since I'm in Canada, $18 in shipping costs. And I honestly regret doing so. First, I'd like to talk about the lack of consideration shown for hardcover users. When you produce a hardcover product, you actually need to take the time to think about how people are going to use it. The people who just bought the hardcover, which in this case includes any local hero backers or late pledgers, can't use Control F because they don't have the PDF. So at least some effort has to be made to think about how they are going to use your product. Especially when buying the hardcover is more expensive than the PDF. In the book, you have 55 encounters that are organized not by encounter difficulty or environment, but rather alphabetically according to their title, which is not a useful way of organizing the product for people who just have access to the hardcover. The only effort I've seen here that even shows that they thought about hardcover buyers is that, after shipping their product, they came out with tables that break down encounters by environment and party levels. I hope that any hardcover shipped today includes them, because mine sure didn't. But they are the kind of thing where the product shouldn't have been shipped without them. They've also since put zero effort into advertising how you actually get these tables. So I'm going to treat this product exactly how it's shipped. However, I will provide a link in the video description so you don't have to search through their website for it. The only reason I'm aware of it is because last October, when I had originally meant to do this review, I checked their site to see if I had the prices right for this video. I would have liked to have seen them email backers and late pledgers and just let them know that this exists, or to put out an update. But as far as I can tell, that never happened. Finally, there is no list provided for whether or not something is a social or combat encounter, or even a mixed encounter. So actually finding the sort of encounter you're looking to run is not made easy by this book. You need to really commit to reading over them. Actually finding an encounter is one issue, but many of the actual encounters themselves have not been laid out well. This affects not only how easy it is to narrow down the encounters that you'd like to run, but also how much work is needed to run these encounters. The book feels like it needed an editing pass where they asked 3 questions. Do users have a succinct way of learning what this encounter is about? Is the information here essential for the DM to know to run this encounter? And finally, could these encounters be better organized? So there are several ways this poor design plays out. The first is font size and selection. Wizards of the Coast uses size 9 Bookmania for its main font. My best guess is this book uses size 12 Times New Roman. The size of the text spreads out encounters more and acts as a barrier towards DMs getting the information they need. The use of Times New Roman also gives the text a very bland look, especially in the encounters that are just all text. I definitely found that it made the product less appealing to read through. The second issue I have is the size of the battle maps. Battle maps throughout the book are used as artwork, I guess to make the text less imposing. There are far too many generic battle maps in this book that are thrown into a corner of a page. At least make them a large enough size that I can actually use them. When you buy a book called Out of the Box Encounters, the last thing you want to have to do is buy a separate map pack just to run them. The fish food encounter provides a good example of why this is an issue. Even though combat is actually a pretty central part of this encounter, and the encounter actually calls for your party to be at times on multiple levels of the ship, all you get with this encounter is a tiny little pair of battle maps for a boat. I'd have less of an issue with this if I felt that the text wasn't excessive in the book, but it often feels like these maps could have been a much more useful size had they just been better with using the space they had. I'd have even been fine if they took up half a page, but something like this is really not helpful to me. Which leads to the final issue I have with the formatting. The fact that the text needs to be more succinct and better organized. All this text just ends up serving as a barrier towards running these encounters. These are supposed to be easy to run encounters. Any notes I need to make on them should be pretty minimal. Fire for Effect is a good example of this. This is supposed to be something you can just pick up and run. But I know I would never run this because there are 11 enemies, and there's too much I would need to either make notes on or reference back to in order to know how the hobgoblins and fire giant are expected to act. And it's not laid out in a way that makes it approachable either. With a more appropriate text size, better formatting, and more succinctness, they could have had a much more reasonable sized battle map here. The encounter is also an example of why incorporating these stat blocks into encounters, where possible, is ultimately for the best. Having to flip around between a 4-page encounter, as well as stat blocks in different pages in the back of the book, would be kind of annoying, especially when these are all one-off encounters that don't seem to share stat blocks. Then there's the Gang of One encounter. Effectively, one whole page of this encounter is dedicated to just introducing it, like not even describing the contents of the encounter. Each encounter needs to provide a concise, one-paragraph summary at the beginning of what the encounter is about. That way I can just skim it over and see if it's something I would run. On top of that, much of what is in this encounter's introduction is generic enough advice that it should have been thrown into an advice section of the book that covers adjusting encounters for different environments, along with general advice for running social or combat encounters. It's hardly alone here either. These are just some of the encounters that have introductions that take up either a page of text or close to it. Even the introductions that are shorter often talk more about the intent behind the encounter than actually summarizing what the actual encounter is about, which doesn't help if I'm just trying to find an encounter to run. 3 Eyes or Better is another example of an encounter where the text just goes on and on and on. It's also not formatted in a way to make it easy for you to differentiate between the key elements of the encounter. Like the text describing the battle area is not visually differentiated from the text describing other elements of the encounter. On top of that, the map for the encounter is on the back of a page, while the text describing the location is on the front of that page. And this makes it unnecessarily more difficult to understand this location and its layout. It also takes about half a page of text to describe every little detail about this tent. It gets to be a bit excessive, frankly. In this encounter, you can also see here how dialogue is shown in this book. It's like this throughout the book. But this is why text boxes are a thing. But this encounter is hardly alone for these issues. Even smaller encounters see these issues. Ultimately, they had many different options here for how to organize the encounters in this book so that the different components of these encounters were more approachable, like using different colors, fonts and sizes, bullet points, and text boxes to help reveal all the different components of an encounter. There are plenty of products out there where you can see the different methods other publishers have used to convey this sort of information, particularly on the DM's Guild. Now you could argue that, say, something like Encounters in the Savage Cities has less encounters in it, and therefore more time could be devoted to design. Fine, but surely there's a middle ground to be found between this and this. So now let's talk about the stat blocks. The book includes a bunch of stat blocks used in these encounters. However, they also suffer because of the choices made with formatting and text size. It becomes far too hard to see at times where one stat block begins and the next ends. The size of the text and the poor placement of artwork also makes even fairly basic stat blocks go over multiple pages at times. This Sky Raider Goblin looks like a cool creature to throw at the party. Unfortunately, instead of just giving me the text for it on one page, its stat block gets split up into 2 pages because of this large text and the artwork thrown here. All for a CR 1/4 creature. The last thing I want to be doing when using such a basic creature is having to flip back and forth between pages to use it. So to conclude this review, early reiterations of 50 of these encounters were released for playtesting a few years back. So it definitely seems like they had a head start on the writing of this book and could have focused more on how to better convey these encounters. Ultimately, there is some potential out of these encounters, particularly the shorter encounters. But many of the encounters aren't laid out well, and it does affect how easy they are to find and ultimately run. In my view, the overall quality of these encounters also suffers because of this. While I'll totally acknowledge the challenges that come with fitting content into a 3 to 4 page encounter, I'm still not really left with the impression that Nerdarchy did enough research to see what other publishers were doing to make their encounter books approachable for DMs. Now, to their credit, if you go to their Kickstarter page, they did share some examples of how the product was going to look. So maybe the signs were there. But even these only somewhat hint at how text-heavy it can be at times. I think if you're willing to invest the time to read and make notes on these encounters, they can work. But, particularly for the encounters that are longer than 2 pages, you're probably going to need to make notes. At the end of the day, someone who just buys the PDF of this might feel that they got their money's worth, but I can't recommend purchasing the hardcover. So I give this product the following scores. Alright, that's it for the video. If you had your own thoughts about this product, including a favorite encounter, be sure to let me know in the comments. Otherwise, if you liked what you saw here, be sure to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.